Hi everyone, and welcome back to Think Outside the Board. I'm your host, Brian, and today I'm doing a first impressions video on Excavation Earth. Now, a first impressions video is basically just that. It is my first impressions after having played the game once or maybe twice, which means that I'm going to show you some of the mechanics so that you can get a feel for how the game plays and give you my brief opinion on it. But these videos are not full teaches and they are not full reviews. So the idea behind the first impressions videos are something that I can get out quickly when a game is brand new. So either when the Kickstarter has just delivered or when the game has just hit retail, and there aren't a lot of videos out there. So I'm designing this series as a way for there to be something for you to go and get a look at the game before it's really landed and before there aren't too many other videos. So the idea here is that it's a quick video. It gives you a look at the gameplay. I tell you my thoughts about it after a play or two, but it's not as big or comprehensive as a full review or a full teach would be. So if this is a game that you would like to see a full teach and review on, let me know in the comments, and it's something I'll add to the queue for later. Now, again, these first impressions videos are intended to be for games that are just landing, but it's a new series, and there are some games from October through December that I'm trying to get in there as well. But in general, as we move forward, these videos will only be produced for brand new games. All right, so today we're going to be looking at Excavation Earth, and I'm pretty excited about it because I like the game, and I'm going to take you over to the table. I'm going to show you how things kind of work in general, and we'll come back here and I'll tell you what I thought about the game. So this is the board for Excavation Earth. I've got these player tokens on it that are standing up, and I'm going to just lay them down so you can see them. We've got a card market over here. This is one player board and some starting player supplies, including 8 money and all these little cubes. This is a buyer market, and this will influence what buyers come to these various market locations. And then there is this mothership board that sort of works as a end of round area majority scoring. The game plays in 3 rounds, so you've got a round tracker over here. This is just player order, and you can use this little cylindrical token to mark player order. But then over the course of the round, player order may change, so that's what these tokens are for. And everybody will start with a worker in the 1st and 4th market locations. And then when you actually start playing, you will place your 3rd worker in any of the locations you want to. So let's say I started maybe here. Also, all players will start with 3 of these movement cards. And they'll also start with 6 of these cards. Now, the cool thing about these cards is that they are triple use cards. So they're all going to have a symbol, they're going to have a color, and they'll be used for various things. And they'll also have a number of these like cylindrical fuel cells, and you can use it for that for movement. These cards that you start out with are purely movement cards, so the only thing that you can use these cards for is movement. And you're going to have 1 card with 1 less movement than most of your cards, and 1 card with 1 more movement than most of your cards. So you can pull these cards out when you're doing movement, specifically to do movement, especially if you want to go a little bit less or a little bit more than a normal card would let you. But in general, you're kind of using these cards to conserve these cards. And then every round you'll get 6 new cards and you'll be able to do various actions with them. So in each of the 3 rounds, marked by this marker, there are going to be 3 phases. So each round will have 3 phases. The first phase is a preparation phase where you're just kind of refreshing certain things around the board. I don't feel like that's something we have to really go into right now when I'm trying to give you just kind of broad strokes of the mechanics. And then the 3rd phase of each round will be a scoring phase. So most of each round is that 2nd phase, which is when players take turns. And I'm going to explain the various actions to you and how the cards work with those actions. Now, there are 7 actions that you can take on your turn or a pass. So essentially there are 8 actions in total, but the pass is just ending your turn. The first thing you can do though is movement. And movement will use these fuel canisters. So as we said, you're either going to have use one of these cards that you get at the beginning of the game that will give you either 2, 3, or 4 movement, or if you're using one of your regular cards, they all have 3 movement. Now, a movement will be taken between your workers, and you can take either all of the movement in one worker, like that, or you can split them. So you could go 1, 2, 3, and you're just following these lines around the board to determine where you can go. The second thing you can do on your turn is to excavate. Now, to excavate, you need to be in an area that has these tokens, these cardboard tiles. When you do an excavate action, you have to discard a card that matches the same color as the tiles you want to excavate. And you can see I dealt myself a starting hand of 6 cards here that has all of the different colors, and they correspond to the 5 different regions on the board. So, you know, if I had a guy here, when I did an excavate action, I would need to discard a yellow card, and then I could take tiles from here. Now you can take 2 tiles when you excavate. So if you have your workers set up on various locations, you can take tiles from those locations as long as they're both the color that you're discarding. Sometimes you'll end up with, you know, more than one tile on a single location. And so you can just, if you're there, I could discard a red card and then I would excavate both of these tiles. Now, when you excavate tiles, you're going to take them and put them on your player board. And you have this kind of interesting storage situation going on here where you can hold up to 5 different tiles, and you can hold up to 3 tiles that are from the black market. So that's a different action, and I'll go over that in a minute. But if you are taking tiles from the black market, they have to go in one of these 3 black market sections. Also, anytime you take a tile, whether you excavate it or you buy it from the black market, which I'll show you in a minute, but whenever you place these tiles on your board, you can take one of your cubes, take a sample of the artifact that you are excavating, and you'll see it's a red with, this one's kind of a circle, so I would put my sample here, and I would mark off that cube. And then at the end of the game, as you've filled this out over the course of the game, you will score bonus points for various kind of majorities for how many cubes you got in each row and each column. But that'll happen at the end of the game. So the third action that you can do on your turn is a market action. To do a market action, you have to be in one of these locations with these 6 symbols here. And to do a market action, you would discard a card, and it would have to have the matching symbol on it. Now, the market action is basically your way of getting the buyers you want into that market. So you're kind of tweaking the market to your satisfaction. So when you do this, you're going to take a white meeple, if there's one available over here from the buyer board, and you're going to put it in to the market where you are. So if I was going to this market, I would discard a card that matched that same symbol, and then I could put a white buyer in there, and then I could put any buyer in there of my choice. Now, there's a whole game going on in terms of the buyers and how much they're going to pay out for the artifacts when you do a sell action. But in general, you want to be selling to buyers that have the most meeples out on the board. So for instance, maybe if I'm setting up for a sell action that's going to be red tiles that I got here, I may put a red buyer in this queue. So you're always going to put a white buyer there first if you can, and then you'll put a buyer of your choice. And these queues only hold 4 buyers. So once you put a buyer in there, a 4th buyer, it's going to bump a buyer out, and that buyer will go back to the queue. Then you're going to take one of your cubes here, and you're going to put it in this area, and essentially you're setting up a place that you can sell. This cube sort of acts as your agent in this transaction that you're preparing for. So that is called a market action. So the 4th action you can do is a sell action. And when you're doing a sell action, you can sell in up to 3 markets, but you have to have a buyer there I should say you have to have one of your workers at any market you want to sell. So a lot of times this sell action requires some setting up ahead of time. You need movement to get everyone where they need to go. So for instance, if I had a worker there, and a worker here, and if I'd set this up ahead of time so that I actually had agents, my little troops in each of these sections, I would be able to sell in all three of these markets. Now I can discard any card to do a sell action. So it doesn't matter the color or the icon on the card when I'm doing a sell action. What does matter, however, is that the color of the buyer matches the color of the tile that I want to sell. So for instance, over here, I could sell this tile to the buyers in this market as long as there is at least one red buyer. And the white buyers are wild, so they will always count. So if I was doing a sell action here with a red tile, I basically have 2 qualifying buyers. And if I was doing this in 3 actions at once, I'd need to be selling a green tile here because those are the only buyers in this queue. And over here, I'd have my choice between purple or red tiles. So if I had all those tiles, if I had everything kind of set up ahead of time, I could do a triple buy. Now you're going to score points for what you sell, but the points are going to be based on, over here on this little buyer board, it's going to show you how many points you're going to get based on how popular the color of the buyer is. So you're going to look at this and you're going to say, okay, red over here is the most popular buyer. So you're going to score a few different ways when you're doing this kind of sell action. The first is if you're selling a certain color, like this red color, comes from the red region. Right now, red has the most buyers out. So it occupies the most popular space. So you'll get 9 points for selling a red tile. You'll get 5 points for selling a tile that is the second most popular, which in this case is a tie between yellow and green. And you would get 2 points for selling to the third most and 0 for the fourth and fifth most. So you're going to count that many points. In this case, this red tile will be worth 9 points to start. You're going to get an additional 2 points for every color buyer in this market that is the same color as the red or as a white buyer. So in this case, I have a red and a white. They're 2 points each. So I'm going to get 13 points for selling this tile. I would apply similar bonuses to my other markets. Now, if you're selling to 2 markets at the same time, you're going to get an additional 3 points, and you're going to get a bonus card. So you'll be able to just pick that up and add it to your hand. If you sell into 3 markets simultaneously, you're going to get 8 bonus points, and you're going to be able to draw 2 cards from the market and select one and keep it and discard one. So selling will score you a lot of points all in one action if you set it up, especially if you do 3 sales all at once. Now, once you do that, the tiles that you sold are just going to go out of the game. But the troops that you have here that are in these various regions where you just sold, they will migrate over to this mothership board. And you'll put them in the same areas that mark the iconography of the markets they came from. So for instance, this one was in this trilobite area, so he would go over here. We had one over here in this weird like sunbursty area, so he would go in this area. And this guy who's in this area with these kind of holes in this weird icon, he will go in this one. Now, this is like its own little area majority game, and it's going to score at the end of each of the 3 rounds. And it has the iconography on this, but in round 1, whoever has the majority in each area at the end of the round will score 5 points. In round 2, whoever has the majority in each area will score 10 points, and the runner-up will score 5 points. And then in round 3, whoever has the area majority in each of these 3 areas will score 15 points. Second place will score 10. Third place will score 5. So you're going to get points from doing these sales. You're also going to get points for doing these motherboard at the end of every round. And as I said before, at the end of the game, you're going to score points for this player board depending on how you've filled out rows and columns. They don't all score equally, and they tend to score in ranges. So for instance, the yellow column here will score 4, 8, or 16 points, depending if you have 2, 3, or 4 samples in this column. Each of the columns score somewhat similarly, but the numbers are a little bit different, and the rows score as well. This bottom row will score 5, 10, or 21 points, depending on if you have 3, 4, or 5 samples. So you'll score a lot of big points here at the end of the game, but you'll be scoring points as you sell, and you'll be scoring points at the end of every round for this area majority thing. So the fifth action that you can take on your turn is called a command action. And that is a way to get these little cubes into these areas as traders. That's trader, that's T-R-A-D-E-R, not trader, that's T-R-A-I-T-O-R, trader. So they're gonna be trading goods for you. So as a command action, you need to play a card that matches a certain market. So for instance, I could play this card and I would use this trilobite icon and I could do something with this market. Now, if I'm doing the command action, I can place a cube there as a trader, and that'll set up a future sell action. I can also take another cube and place it over here in the matching area on this mothership board as an envoy. And I can place him there. I can also, in rounds 2 and 3, retrieve a cube from that area and take it back. Now, there's a couple reasons I might want to do that. I might be running out of space on my player board and need more cubes. I might also have a resounding majority already here, and I may not need extra cubes. So an interesting little thing that's going to happen is that in rounds 2, these cards are going to come out randomly, and you'll put one on each of these 3 areas. And if you ever pull a cube back, not if you put a cube in there, but if you ever pull a cube back, you'll get to do the bonus action on the card. So for instance, in this one, I would be able to excavate up to 2 artifacts of different colors from locations where I already have workers present. So, if this guy was over here, I could take 2 of these artifacts. Now, a lot of times you're going to have to set up this action so that you actually are able to do it when you pull that envoy off. But they're usually pretty strong actions. And then in the 3rd round, these cards are going to flip over to their yellow sides. And if you ever pull a cube off that, you'll be able to take the action on the yellow side. And the yellow sides are generally the same action as the white side, but even more powerful. So that's the 5th action you can do on your turn. It's called a command action. The 6th action you can do is called the smuggle action. Now the smuggle action has to do with these black market locations, which is this area, and this area. And you can see that there are 3 of them, and each of them has 2 of the different icons. So in order to take a black market action, you would need to have a worker there, and then you would have to discard one of the 2 cards, this one or this one, where the icon matches the black market. Now when you do that, you're either going to be able to take 2 tiles that you have inside your player board and sell them to the black market, which is essentially kind of over here. If you do that, you're going to sell it for the, you're going to sell it for the amount of money that's on it. So this one only sells for 1 money. But there are other tiles that sell for up to, depending if you have a little expansion called I think it's called the Shiny Boxes mini expansion. You could have tiles that sell up to 10 money. The idea generally, since you're going to be wanting to use these artifacts to sell in the markets for points, is that you'll probably want to sell your cheapest artifacts to the buyers, but sell the most expensive artifacts to the black market because you'll get money for it. And you may need money, you may be out of money. So generally when you're selling artifacts to the black market, you're doing it because you're in a clutch and you need money. You can also, however, buy artifacts from the black market. And when you do that, you'll just take off the top, and you can't take 2 of the same color, so it has to be 2 different colors, but you'll take them off the top and you can slot them into these black market areas on your player board. And when you do that, you're going to also, if you want, which you should, you're going to take samples and mark those off on your player board as well. So generally, you, again, want to try to buy the cheap tiles so you're not spending all of your money. Also, when you're buying, you're actually going to pay 1 more money than each tile is worth. So it's a little bit more expensive to acquire them on the black market. But a lot of times you're doing it because you're getting cheap tiles that you can turn around and sell up here, or you're doing it because there are specific tiles that you need to complete this board for scoring at the end of the game, and they may not be appearing out on the main board. So it may get to a point in the game where the only way that you can get those tiles that you need to fill in some holes here is to buy them directly from the black market. Now, the last action that you can do is called a survey action. And to do a survey action, you're going to discard a card, any card. The key to this is that it's going to affect these cards here. And these cards in general will determine what tiles come out into the black market in the following round. So right now we see that we're going to get some yellow artifacts, two groups of yellow artifacts, some purple and some blue coming out into the black market. Now, this is an action that you can only take in the first 2 rounds, because in the third round, there won't be a following round. The third round is the last round. So there'll be no reason to change this, because there won't be artifacts coming out in a final round, because the third round is the final round. But you'll take a card that you want in the first 1 or 2 rounds of a color that you want to see come out in this black market. And you'll discard one of these and you'll put your card in its place. The other thing that you'll do is you'll mark that with a cube. Now, this cube placement is only temporary. You'll get that cube back at the end of the round. But the reason that you're doing that is to mark that that card has already been cycled. And so if you place it here, it definitely will stay there in this tableau. And when you do the kind of setup for the next round, there will be orange artifacts coming out. So if a player has done this and put a card down, it can't be changed. Another player could later do this action and change one of these other cards. But if it's marked with one of these cubes, that can't be removed. The other thing you'll do during a survey action is you'll take the next spot in turn order for the next round. So if I was, in a 3-player game and I was third, but I did this action before anyone else had done, I would put this 1 token in front of me so that I would remember that at the end of the round, when we change turn order for the next round, I would go to 1. So that is the survey action. The last action that you can do, the 8th action of the game, is to pass. And you're just going to do that essentially when you've run out of cards, although you don't have to. You'll always carry these cards over to another round. So if you don't actually spend any of these in a round and you don't want to, that's okay. You don't have to spend them. You also don't have to spend your other cards. You're going to start each round with 6 cards, but you can carry over 2 of these cards to the following round. So once it gets to the point that I've done 4 actions, if I have 2 cards in my hand, I could pass and I would keep these 2 cards and I would keep the movement cards. So you can pass when you have 2 actions left, and you'll also retain movement cards. You could pass even earlier, but you'll end up having to discard some cards. So that would be essentially wasted actions and very inefficient. You wouldn't want to do that. If what's going on the board is such that your remaining 2 cards aren't going to work that well for you, you can just pass and you'll retain them for the following round, along with the new cards, the 6 new cards that you'll get at the start of the next round. Anyway, that is the pass action. If you run out of cards completely, then you'll have to pass when it comes to your turn. But you can always pass early. So essentially what you're doing in Excavation Earth, if it's not already obvious, you're going to move your workers around. So there's worker placement here. You're going to be buying tiles from the black market for 1 more than they cost, as well as excavating tiles from their places around the board. Remember, when you do that, you're going to need to be playing cards that match either the color or the icon, depending on the various actions that you're doing. You're going to be using actions to feed certain buyers that you want into these markets and to set up your traders in these markets so that later when you go there with your workers and you sell, you can set up big sales and sell 2 or even 3 tiles at once and score bonuses for these sales. Then you're going to be competing in this area majority at the end of every round for points. Depending on when you've made sales, your traders come over here and there'll be this kind of area majority component. And then at the very end of the game, after all the rounds are complete, you're going to score this area majority for all the samples that you've taken in your various rows and your columns. And then amidst all of that, you have these kind of like buyer's markets, and they're going to cycle a little bit every round. Plus, as we've described already, players can manipulate these markets. I mean, in essence, Excavation Earth is a market manipulation game and a worker placement game, really. And a card selection game, because you're going to be dealing with these triple use cards. So those are the kind of the main three things that are going on: worker placement, market manipulation, multi-use cards. Well, and four really, because you have these various area majority scoring elements as well. Okay, so I received my copy of Excavation Earth in December. I think on Christmas Eve, or maybe the 23rd. So I actually got mine in 2020, but it's slated to hit retail later this month, I believe. I mean, it's hard to say because of all the shipping that's been affected worldwide, but in an ideal world, it'll be hitting retail before the end of this month. It's designed by David Turksey. It's published by Mighty Boards. In general, I like both of those things. I like David Turksey. He's done a lot of solo modes for various games. He also worked on a lot of the Mind Clash stuff, like Anachrony and the new Perseverance Castaway Chronicles. He has another sort of a sci-fi war game that has a Kickstarter that's shipping out later this year called The Defense of Procyon 3, and that looks pretty cool to me. And he's just a ton of stuff all over the place. I mean, he's done a lot of those T games like Teotihuacan. I like David Turksey. I think he's a really good designer, and he seems to be getting better and better as time goes on. And he's still a young man, so he has hopefully decades of board game designing ahead of him. And he's already made some fantastic games. And Mighty Boards' other big hits include Petrichor, Vengeance, and Posthuman, which are three very different kind of games. Posthuman is kind of campaigny. There's actually a Kickstarter up right now for Posthuman Saga, which looks pretty good in my opinion. And Petrichor is this very kind of cool game that Turksey also co-designed that has to do with clouds dropping rain from the sky, and the way that rain sort of fertilizes plants and how they grow. Sort of fascinating. And then Vengeance is, kind of like a video game where you're trying to kill all these people. It's very thematic. But I like Mighty Boards stuff in general, and I like David Turksey a lot. So I was looking forward to this game. It didn't do that well on Kickstarter. I mean, it funded. I think the funding goal was $30,000 and ended up making about $127,000. So it came in over 4 times the asking price. But I don't really know anyone else who backed Excavation Earth, and it didn't seem to make huge waves on the Kickstarter radars. So I don't know how many people are aware of it. But as far as I'm concerned, Excavation Earth is a really good game. I really like it. I think between the sort of 4 main mechanics that are going on there, the market manipulation, the worker placement, the multi-use cards, and the various kind of area majority scoring, there's just so many good choices for gamers to make. And I love games like this that sort of give you various systems enough to give you enough room to do different things. And then you can adjust with what you're doing based on how your plans are going and what other players are doing. And I think a system that kind of gives you the room to do that, and the ability to do different things, and then you can change kind of your strategies and tactics depending on the board game state. Those are some of my favorite games. And Excavation Earth has that. And for my money, it's really smart. It's basically considered to be a heavy game right now, according to its Board Game Geek rating. And I think that's probably accurate. I think it could maybe be, on the heavy side of medium light, or somewhere in the medium heavy side, except for the fact that so many of your actions really do require a lot of planning and a lot of coordination. When you're trying to set up those sell actions and sell in multiple markets at one time, and you're also trying to coordinate different cards, sometimes you're playing cards to put traders in those markets. And then later on, you're trying to manipulate the color of the buyers in the markets. And then you need to get your workers in place to make those big sales. So there's a lot of planning. It can take, a whole round to really effectively set up a really good sale that's going to get you good points. And that can be pretty thinky. That can be pretty crunchy. So even though the game itself, I feel like the mechanics, the things that you can do on your turn aren't too brain burnery and crunchy, the fact is to set up those moves does require a lot of planning and a lot of coordinated turns. And, it is something that could go sideways for you depending on what other players do, and you may have to react. Or it could also be something where you make a mistake in your planning and then you can't quite do what it is that you wanted to do, at least not completely. And so I think when you take into that account, that kind of like crunchiness of those actions and the way you kind of need to plan in advance, I think the fact that it's rated as a heavy game does make sense. Although, as I said, I do think it's not really on people's radar too much at this time. So if it hits retail and people play it more and they get a little more used to the game, I think that rating could come down a little bit. But it's definitely, I don't think it's going to go further down out of the medium heavy range at all because of that coordination that's required. But for my money, it's a great game. It's really fun, lots of good choices. And I think, if you've seen it and you've seen the kind of the artwork and the colors and the various mechanics and you think it appeals to you, go for it. Definitely for people who are like that this is their kind of game, this game is in their wheelhouse, I think they'll really enjoy this game in particular. There's also variable faction abilities on the player boards. So I didn't actually show those when we were looking at the game, but each player board, each faction has their own ability that kind of breaks certain rules. So for instance, one player board lets you do an extra worker movement sometimes. There's another one that lets you sell to a market even if you don't have the right card. And all of the player boards are kind of marked with a number. So you will start play at the beginning of the game in sort of the initiative order of those boards. And I assume that somewhere in the development process, they decided that certain powers were perhaps a little bit more powerful than others. And so those more powerful factions were sort of pushed to the end of the starting queue. There's also an expansion that came out for this through the Kickstarter, and it added in 2 more factions, as well as a little mini expansion with some more tiles and things like that. I think you should get it if you can. I mean, if you like the game, you're probably going to want the extra factions. And there's different colors too. So you'll have, I think, green and blue player colors for those 2 expansion factions. So I would definitely get it. I don't know if it's going to be packaged in with the retail version. I'm assuming not. It may be for sale separately, but you may have to look for it as a separate purchase. Anyway, that's Excavation Earth. I hope this video helped you make a buying decision, helped you kind of give you a little window into the gameplay of this game. I hope you're enjoying these videos, and I hope some of what's coming up will be, worth your time as well. If this is your first time at the channel, please consider subscribing or liking the video. And also you can hit the alarm bell after you subscribed if you want to be notified whenever I publish future videos. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.